Link2 helps identify, evaluate, and invest in the world's leading unicorn companies. And the main goal here is to democratize the financial markets. And with me is the Chief Operating Officer, Joe Indoso, and the Chief Growth Officer, Susan Miller. Welcome. And let's just start with, give me an overview of the company, because what you're doing is really unique.
We're founded on a very basic premise that the single most valuable investment class is the equity of tech companies while they're still private, before they IPO.
Pre-IPO.
Absolutely. And what we're trying to do is solve this problem of access, because historically, the only people that have been able to invest in that asset class are largely, frankly, not people. They're institutions.
That's right, yeah.
They're private equity firms, VC firms, hedge funds, large sovereign wealth funds from around the world, and individuals who are oligarchs, billionaire types. Right. But people like those of us, sitting around here, find it very difficult, if not impossible, to make investments systematically in that asset class. So that's what we're doing at Link2. We're making it very simple, easy, affordable for regular people who are accredited investors, individuals, not institutions, to allocate a portion of their portfolios and consistently make quality investments in private tech companies.
Because really, the system as it is now is the rich get richer, more powerful, so this is a way to, just give people an opportunity to take advantage of that. And by the way, unicorn you define as a company worth $1 billion.
Correct. A private company valued at over $1 billion.
Okay, so I know there's a few kind of slightly different definitions. So talk to me about just how this is an alternative for people, and how do they become an accredited investor? What do you have to do to be that?
Sure. So not our rules, but the SEC has rules about who can be an accredited investor. So typically, litmus tests would include something like, as an individual, having over $200,000 in annual income, as a household $300,000, or $1 million in liquid net worth, not including your primary residence.
Okay.
So not our rules. However, we have figured out a pretty quick way to automate the process of accreditation. So you can go on link2.com and we can facilitate that accreditation process for you.
Okay.
Right now, only 2% of eligible investors are actually investing in private markets, 2%. And so, as Joe shared, our mission is really to democratize the private markets and create not only the possibility for folks to understand what are the accreditation rules, how do they get accredited, but give access to some of the leading unicorn investments, so some of the exciting things on the Link2 platform.
So, okay, I have a lot of questions. So let's go back to the accreditation, because the SEC chair, Gary Gensler, wants to even make those rules more strict, right?
So, it's interesting. Gensler has come out saying that he thinks the rules should be more strict. There's actually a bill right now that has been proposed that would allow folks, as a part of the Jobs 4.0 Act, that would allow folks to invest 10% of their income, no matter what their income is. So clearly, we're hearing something different from the American people than the SEC chair.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I guess
I fully agree with that. Yeah. I think that if the fundamental premise of securities regulations in this area is to protect investors from scams and people that are acting in bad faith are basically going to steal their money, I get it. Yeah. We're all for that, right? But you don't necessarily achieve that simply by having these, carved in stone financial tests. You actually ought to test for one's level of financial sophistication, one's capacity to take on risk, right? There are ways to get to that underlying question of, is somebody, capable of making investments in these assets without necessarily having these strict tests. And so to make those tests even more strict is going to do the opposite. It's going to make it, like you started out saying, right? Fewer people are actually going to be able to invest in the asset class. We're saying no. It ought to be the opposite.
Right.
In America today, there's no securities regulation that prevents somebody from putting $10,000 on black in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Or the lotto.
And I'm saying you can put $10,000 in a quality tech company that's worth billions. and will, IPO at some point for tens of billions. Why is it somehow not okay for a person to put 10,000 through Link2 in that company, and then they can go to Vegas and put 10,000 on black?
With their winnings.
It's a great argument. I mean, it's the classic catch-22, right? I mean, how do you accumulate wealth if you're never allowed to start to invest it? You just get lucky, I guess.
Well, and if you think about where people are creating generational wealth, it is in the private market.
Private equity.
So typically, in the past, let's say 20 years ago, a typical company would go public after 4 years. Now companies are staying private much longer. So when you think about where their hockey stick and growth is happening, it's typically before they go public. And so if you want access to where that exponential growth is happening, the private markets is the only way to access that.
And you mentioned some of the companies that people are. How do you vet those? How do they get through the process where they're available on Link2?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's super important to us because with our business model, we're actually using our own firm's capital to make these investments first.
Okay.
And so before we open them up to participation, we take the risk of those investments using our own capital. And you can imagine a situation where we use our capital to make a certain investment and none of our members decide they like it, in which case we're holding the bag for the entire thing. So investment selection is critical, obviously, because we're taking the risk with our own capital. So we have a process where that's driven by a couple of filters. We start out by looking at the whole tech spectrum. We've identified certain segments of technology that we think are going to generate long-term value because of the nature of the underlying innovation in those sectors. We then identify companies, specific companies within those sectors that we think are going to be the survivors, are going to be the ones that are most competitive, will take the most market share. And then we actually try to make the investment, which in the private markets actually isn't easy or automatic. It's not like in the public equities
That's
market,
right, yeah.
right? Where you just, once you do your investment selection, you basically go to NASDAQ.
How do you do that? Do you do like a private placement, or?
It's many different means, right? So, sometimes we're able to get an allocation to a primary funding round of a VC-funded company. So we'll fund a company alongside other VCs. Many times we have to go into the secondary market because a company that we might want to invest in just isn't doing a round at the current time. So we'll speak to the founders, we'll speak to members of the C-suite of the company, certain high-level employees that may have shares that they may want to liquefy a portion of. And we buy those shares off.
And you can actually do it on our website even.
Okay.
So if you have shares in a private company, often it's one of the executives that Joe
I see.
shared.
Okay.
You can go on and type in the company and see what's the price we're willing to pay for those shares, and it'll automatically generate the transfer documents, et
I
cetera.
see. So it goes both ways. So an executive could also list shares.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, very
Yeah.
interesting. And then explain the process. Like, let's say I go on there and I buy shares of something. Then if the company goes public, do I get stock, or how do I exit that investment?
Yeah, very simply, when you make an investment on Link2, you, along with our other members, end up owning a fractional share of a special purpose vehicle that owns the underlying private company shares. So when that company lists on NASDAQ, say, those shares are registered, right, and they get listed on NASDAQ. What happens at that point is the shares get distributed by the company's transfer agent to our custodian, who then turns around and distributes it to all of our members' brokerage accounts. So you'll get your share of whatever that company's, shares were that you invested in. They'll go to your brokerage account at XYZ Broker, and then you're free at that point to sell them or hold them.
Ah, very interesting.
So if you think about a Coinbase, a Robinhood, a Novia, Marquita, SoFi, those are some examples of the companies that we've invested in that have gone public. And so, typically we're investing, pre-IPO. Those companies then have their exit, and hopefully they're still doing well on the public equity market today, but our investors are seeing a terrific return.
Because they got in pre-IPO.
Exactly.
So, is there a minimum to get started?
Yes, so the minimum investment is $10,000.
Okay.
And so for $10,000 investment, you could make your first investment in Ripple Labs. who's currently facing a lawsuit against the SEC right now. It could be Kraken or Abra or Uphold, Whoop, Eat Just, so range of companies, and as Joe shared, most of them are in the tech space, but right now digital assets are the hottest sector.
Yeah. Super interesting, and I really support anything that like gets more people involved in the market and allows more people to build wealth, because it's a concern. So thank you, Joe and Susan. It's wonderful to hear about the company.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us here.
All right, thanks.